I love how one Star Trek captain hates Picard's Enterprise D replacement from the TNG movies. I love Star Trek. Lower Decks' running joke about Captain Carol Freeman, Don Lewis hating Sovereign-class starships like Captain Jean-Luc Picard's Patrick Stewart USS Enterprise E. Star Trek Lower Decks wrapped up its fifth and final season on Paramount Plus with an epic story spanning the Star Trek multiverse. Only Captain Freeman and the USS Cerritos could save Star Trek's prime timeline from being obliterated by a devastating soliton wave. Captain Carol Freeman took great pride in the USS Cerritos, which became the pride of Starfleet's California class. Though there were moments throughout Star Trek Lower Decks where Freeman felt she deserved command of a better starship, Carol ably led the Cerritos through numerous second contact missions and crises. Freeman was promoted to Starbase 80 at the end of Star Trek Lower Decks, but she spearheaded a greater respect for the California class, a respect Carol doesn't have for Sovereign-class starships. Why Star Trek Lower Decks' Captain Freeman hates Picard's Sovereign-class Enterprise. Star Trek Lower Decks creator Mike McMahon first sprinkled in Captain Carol Freeman's disdain for the Sovereign class in Star Trek Lower Decks' Season 1 finale, No Small Parts. When the USS Cerritos undergoes repairs at Douglas Station, Freeman orders no cosmetic changes to her starship, stating, "I hate it when a ship gets repaired and comes out looking all Sovereign class." Hilariously, it's one of the rare times a Star Trek captain dissed the design of Captain Picard's USS Enterprise E. In Star Trek Lower Decks' series finale, The New Next Generation, the USS Cerritos is transformed into other designs found in the multiverse. When the soliton wave turns the Cerritos all Sovereign class, a resigned Captain Freeman says, "I guess I'll have to take it." Carol had no time to complain since she had a universe to save. It's a riotously funny callback to Freeman's disdain for the Sovereign class, especially when Star Trek captains commonly envy the USS Enterprise. But Carol just doesn't like the Sovereign class, and I love her for it. The USS Enterprise E and the Sovereign class starship design in general debuted in Star Trek First Contact. The Enterprise E replaced the Galaxy-class USS Enterprise D, which was destroyed in Star Trek Generations. Designed by John Eves, the sleek Sovereign class was built as a warship specifically to fight the Borg. However, because it only appeared in 3 Star Trek The Next Generation movies, the Enterprise E couldn't imprint itself on fans the way the USS Enterprise D did after 7 seasons of TNG. Despite its successes in Star Trek First Contact, Star Trek Insurrection, and Star Trek Nemesis, the USS Enterprise E feels like a lesser successor to the D, which returned to glory in Star Trek Picard Season 3. The Enterprise E was also lost under mysterious circumstances, which adds to its legacy feeling underdeveloped. It tickles me that Captain Freeman on Star Trek Lower Decks sure doesn't think much of the Sovereign class, even if one of them is the USS Enterprise. The USS Enterprise D was a symbol. It wasn't just another starship. No, it was a floating cathedral of Starfleet's ideals, a diplomatic fortress, and a science lab rolled into one, with a touch of luxury for good measure. From its soaring saucer section to the comfy carpets that lined its corridors, it felt like home. Which is why when Captain Edward Jellicoe, yes, that Jellicoe from Chain of Command, made it clear he wasn't exactly a fan of the Enterprise E, I couldn't help but love the man for it. Because let's be real, the Enterprise E is sleek, sharp, deadly. It's a warship. And for Jellicoe, the guy who temporarily captained the Enterprise D and shook up its famously relaxed command structure to throw shade at its replacement, that's just poetic irony. It's like watching a strict substitute teacher return years later, only to find the school's been turned into a military training academy. The Enterprise E shiny, but at what cost? Let's break this down. The Enterprise E, introduced in Star Trek First Contact, is everything the D wasn't. Gone are the warm tones and family-friendly nooks. The E is all cold metal and combat readiness. It's the equivalent of trading your peaceful spacefaring luxury liner for a stealth bomber. That transformation made sense for the TNG films, especially since the Federation was up against the Borg, the Sana, and eventually the Reman threat. But some fans, and apparently one very opinionated former captain, saw it as a betrayal of the show's roots. Jellicoe, who always came across as a man who valued order and tradition, likely saw the Enterprise E as a symptom of a broader Starfleet shift, less exploration, more confrontation. And boy, does that rub the wrong way. Jellicoe, the man who made Troy wear a uniform, when Jellicoe took over the Enterprise D in Chain of Command, he ruffled feathers. He made Counselor Troy wear an actual uniform gasp, scheduled 4 shifts instead of 3, and expected real military decorum on a ship that sometimes felt like a mobile think tank with kids and families on board. To some, Jellicoe was a tyrant. To others, he was the first guy who treated the Federation's flagship like a battleship. The irony? He hated the actual battleship they gave Picard in the movies. It's not official Star Trek canon, but in extended universe novels and fan interpretations, Jellicoe never truly embraced the militarization of Starfleet, at least not the way the Enterprise E represented it. That twist of personality, this cold, strict officer longing for a ship with humanity, diplomacy, and exploration, is fascinating. And it says something deeper about how even Starfleet's so-called hardliners see value in the softer, more idealistic side of the Federation. The E's missing soul. You could argue that the Enterprise E lacked a soul. It didn't have 10 forward. It didn't have families aboard. It didn't even really have light. Everything about it screamed, "We're at war," even when it wasn't. And while Picard adjusted and even thrived in this new environment, it was a far cry from the more intellectual, emotionally complex world of the next generation. Jellicoe, despite his tight regulation and often brash behavior, was an anti-idealist. He challenged Picard's crew because he wanted results. He needed efficiency. But that doesn't mean he wanted a warship. And in hindsight, he probably saw the Enterprise E as the Federation compromising its soul in the name of survival. That's the paradox that makes his disdain for the Enterprise E so satisfying. Jellicoe, the man who seemed the least sentimental about the D, ultimately represents a voice of nostalgia for the ship's mission and character. A hidden commentary on Star Trek's evolution. Star Trek fans have debated for years whether the franchise lost its way during the TNG movies. The stories became darker, more action-driven. Picard morphed from a diplomat and thinker into an action hero who'd rather fire a phaser than talk through a problem. Jellicoe's perspective, this low-key resentment of the Enterprise E, feels like a meta-commentary. As if the character himself is looking around and asking, when did Starfleet stop being about exploration and start looking like a galactic navy? He's not alone. Fans who love the optimism and high-concept storytelling of TNG found themselves yearning for the days when a typical episode involved a moral dilemma, a first contact, and maybe a holodeck malfunction, not space zombies and shootouts. Jellicoe's critique gives voice to that silent group of fans who love Trek not for its battles, but for its brains. The captain we didn't know we needed. Jellicoe's brief stint in command made him unforgettable, even polarizing. But in hindsight, he was a necessary counterpoint to Picard, a man who could see the flaws in the Federation's utopia and call them out. His hypothetical disapproval of the Enterprise E doesn't stem from bitterness or jealousy. It comes from a deep understanding of what Starfleet should be. And I love him for it. Because sometimes it takes someone on the outside, someone you never quite warmed up to recognize when